I was born on the 10th of December 1815 to a famous English poet Lord Byron and an Isabella Milbank. However, my birth was quite a disappointment to my father as he had hoped for a glorious boy. My name is Ada Lovelace, and this is my story. My mother, called by her family-abbed friends Annabella, was a naturally gifted girl. To cultivate her obvious intelligence, my grandparents hired William Friend, a former Cambridge University professor, as her tutor. He instructed her like a Cambridge student. Her studies involved science and mathematics, which was unusual for a woman in Victorian era. Her passion for mathematics later made my father nickname her his Princess of Parallelograms. My mom was a stiff, religious woman with conservative strict morals, often described as cold, a total opposite to my morally fractured father, who had a scandalous reputation and had had numerous affairs. Annabella was aware of her strong intellect, and she was proud to demonstrate it in her social circle. My parents first met somewhere in March 1812. Mom later said to her mother that though she would not venture to introduce herself to Lord Byron, she would certainly accept his introduction if it were offered. Byron's popularity was rising following the success of his work Childe Harold's Pilgrimage. Annabella came across him on many social occasions, and, it seems, my father was attracted to my mom's modesty and intellect, and in October 1812 he proposed marriage through her aunt. In response, she wrote a summary of his character and 3 days later refused him. However, in 1813 he met for the first time in 4 years his half-sister, Augusta Lee. Rumors of their incestual relationship spread around. Augusta's daughter Medora, who was born in 1814, was suspected to have been my father's child. These rumors, as well as the burden of his increasing debts, made my father seek marriage with Mom again. She was well aware of my dad's shortcomings, and described him to my grandmother as a very bad, very good man. However, she was a young girl, and her obsession with him was stronger than her doubts. She took it as her religious obligation to support him and improve his behavior. In August 1813, she contacted him in writing for the first time. The letters continued into the next year, some offering reassurance and support during times when public opinion of Byron was not favorable, others describing the imperfect attachment, as she called it, she felt for him. Even after initially refusing him, she seemed to have been plagued with a persistent interest in his charismatic personality, so when Byron proposed again, she did accept. My parents were married privately, on the 2nd of January 1815. They started living at Piccadilly Terrace in London. My father was in great financial distress at the time. He rejected payments offered for his written works, since he believed business was not appropriate for a gentleman, and gifted copyrights to people who had helped him. He was having difficulty selling his estates at Newstead Abbey and Rochdale to clear his debt. During the summer of 1815, he began to unleash his anger and hostility on my mother, who was pregnant with me. His moods were dark, and he began to drink heavily. In a letter to his half-sister, Augusta Lee, he shared his suspicions that his wife had broken the lock on his desk and searched it. Later in the year, he began an affair with a London actress at Drury Lane Theatre where he was a director. Mother became increasingly upset. In the late stages of pregnancy, she feared that her husband might be going mad. In November 1815, she wrote to Augusta and told her of my father's moods and behavior. In answer to her letter, Augusta traveled to the Byron's home to assist. Upon her arrival, she became the subject of Byron's wrath and believed him to be temporarily insane. My father was disappointed when his wife gave birth to a girl. I was named after my father's half-sister, Augusta Lee, and was called Ada by father himself. In January 1816, as they passed their first anniversary, father decided they must move from the rented house at Piccadilly Terrace. He recommended that Mom take me to her parents' home and stay there temporarily until he settled their finances. In disbelief, my mother sought medical advice, as she had become convinced that her husband had gone mad. She invited a physician to their home to assess him. My father was unaware of the true purpose for the visit. The doctor recommended she do, as Byron requested, and moved to her parents' estate. Mother began a detailed documentation of her husband's behavior, moods, and speech. She contacted his solicitor and friend, John Hanson, and told him her concern that her husband would take his life. She also provided Hanson with a pamphlet on hydrocephalus, accompanied by notes that suggested Byron could have this particular condition. Following this conversation, she took me and traveled to her parents' residence in Leicestershire. She would not see her husband again. During her first month away from him, my mother wrote to her husband affectionately, addressing him as "Dearest Duck." Her mother also wrote to him and invited him to come to their home. However, her concern about him soon became paramount, and her parents sought legal counsel. Their attorney recommended a legal separation, and sent Byron a letter proposing the separation. Augusta Lee, who had remained with Byron at Piccadilly Terrace since our departure, intercepted the letter, as she feared he would commit suicide if he knew of it. She returned the letter and communicated her opinion that greater consideration should be taken in the matter of the Byron's marriage. A week later, however, a messenger sent Lord Byron the proposal again. This time it reached him. The letter stated that Lady Byron positively affirms that she has not at any time spread reports injurious to Lord Byron's character, with the subtle but clear implication that, unless Lord Byron complies, she might. My father now came to see his wife, whom he had once called Princess of Parallelograms, in affectionate reverence for her mathematical talents, as a calculating antagonist, a mathematical media, and later came to mock her in his famous epic poem Don Juan. Her favorite science was the mathematical. She was a walking calculation. But, anyway, he refused to believe that she no longer wanted to be married to him. He asked Mrs. Lee to write to her. In addition, he refused to dissolve their marriage. A short while later, when my mother made clear her suspicions that his relationship with his half-sister Augusta Lee was incestuous, that he had had homosexual relationships, and had sodomized her, Lady Byron, acts which were illegal, he changed his mind. He agreed to grant her request, if she proved that the request for legal separation was truly hers, and not that of her parents. In response, she personally communicated her feelings to Augusta. Father kept his word, and their separation was made legal in March 1816, in a private settlement. Following the settlement, Augusta wrote to my mother again, but this time her solicitor replied to the private note. Byron was enraged by such cold treatment of his half-sister. Soon after the dissolution of his marriage, he left England, and lived for the rest of his life abroad. Though she wished to separate from her husband, my mother was obsessed by him until her death. She was motivated to save his soul, and secure him a place in heaven. In the years following their separation, she came to believe that the time she had spent with him guaranteed that he would experience God's embrace upon his death. She kept his letters, copies of her own to him, and letters about him. She carefully documented their relationship, supposedly in preparation for any challenge Lord Byron might make for custody of me. I never saw my father, who died in Greece on the 19th of April 1824, at the age of 36. I was 8 at the time. Despite my mother's fears and all the possible precautions taken against it, he'd never sought custody of me, but he had sent for both of us shortly before his death. On his deathbed, he lamented, "Oh, my poor dear child. My dear Ada. My God, could I have seen her? Give her my blessing." We didn't go though. As a child, I was not blessed to have a close relationship with my mother. She often left me in the care of my grandmother Judith Milbank, who doted on me. However, because of the social attitudes of the time, which favored the husband in any separation, with the welfare of any child acting as mitigation, my mother was forced to present herself as a loving mother to the rest of society. This included writing anxious letters to my grandmother about my welfare, with a cover note, saying to retain the letters, in case she had to use them to show maternal concern. It was right in her meticulous style. In one of her letters, she referred to me as it. I talk to it for your satisfaction, not my own, and shall be very glad when you have it under your own. My mother was so much plagued with the idea I might possess my father's perceived madness, that she decided teaching me mathematics from an early age would be the best preventive measure. I was privately educated in mathematics and science by several teachers, including Mary Somerville, the famous astronomist and scientific author. Later, the mathematician Augustus de Morgan extended my knowledge, including the study of advanced calculus topics, such as the numbers of Bernoulli. As long as I remember myself, I was a sickly child. At the age of 8, I experienced headaches that obscured my vision.
In June 1829, I was paralyzed after a bout of measles, and was subjected to continuous bed rest for nearly a year, something which may have extended my period of disability. By 1831, I was able to walk with crutches. Despite the illnesses, I developed my mathematical and technological skills, because I was passionate about the science, in resemblance to my mother. When I was 12 years old, I decided I wanted to fly. I went about the project methodically, thoughtfully, with imagination and passion. My first step, in February 1828, was to construct wings. I investigated different materials and sizes, and considered various materials for the wings: paper, oil silk, wires, and feathers. Additionally, I examined the anatomy of birds to determine the right proportion between the wings and the body. Eventually, I decided to write a book, Flyology, illustrating, with plates, some of my findings. I decided what equipment I would need, for example, a compass, to cut across the country by the most direct road, so that I could surmount mountains, rivers, and valleys. And my final step was to integrate steam with the art of flying.
In her desperate attempt to eradicate any traces of my father's genetical influence, Mom excluded poetry from my studying program.
Mother knows best.
And yet I felt that part of mine, the poetic part, was being repressed. In a bout of teenage rebellion, I wrote to my mother,
"You will not concede me philosophical poetry. Invert the order. Will you give me poetical philosophy, poetical science?"
Mother, no!